Welcome to Window Dressing's Gothic Romance series. This is the last episode in the series that began with the 1939 adaptation of Wuthering Heights and is ending with the 2026 version of it. When I began this series, I had not yet started doing video episodes, but I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode before watching this one, as it contains a fair amount of contextual information about the book and the United Artists film adaptation, against which all others are judged. Emeral Fennel's 2026 adaptation of Wuthering Heights has become a cultural product of contention. The controversy has focused on the failures of her adaptation of Emily Brontë's brilliant classic. But from the many, many things I have seen and read that adopt this stance, very few of them include any note to or awareness of any other film adaptation of the work, including, most importantly, the 1939 adaptation, widely considered a classic and the standard bearer. People seemed oddly angry that this most recent adaptation was only half the book's epic tale, without mentioning that this is the custom in previous adaptations. That frustrating bit of misinformed criticism aside, the casting choice of Heathcliff has been another major focus of debate, and rightly so. Heathcliff is written as a man of color in the original, and while you could toss aside that requirement in 1939 due to overt racism, that version took advantage of whitewashing as a practice to carry off an implied difference in class based on race that equalized Cathy and Heathcliff because of her gender. Ironically, Merle Oberon, Cathy, from the 1939 film, is South Asian, but bleached her skin to appear more Caucasian, resulting in injury and illness. Race isn't just important in the new adaptation because we so rarely see people of color in significant roles, but because it is the very structure of the dynamic which the love story between Cathy and Heathcliff is built. Casting Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff wildly failed the heart of Cathy and Heathcliff's love story, which is rooted in the character's equality. Cathy as a woman, a lady even, albeit one from a rapidly financially ruined family, is a woman nonetheless. Her sex is her station, and it's on par with Heathcliff's, a servant of color. Her options are limited in a different way than his. She cannot go out and make her way in the world. Instead, she is tasked with saving herself and her family through marriage. Regardless of her duty or position, she is a whole person who knows her own mind and wants all of the things that any other person, meaning any other man, would want. The way we know she is not oppressed in her heart, just in her circumstances, is her joyous rages, her wild fancies, and quite frankly, her brattiness. Margot Robbie pulled this off impeccably. She is Cathy, and that is not something I expected to be saying. I was deeply impressed by her in this film, and think she brings a touch of what Merle Oberon brought to the 1939 classic. Cathy meets Heathcliff as a child, an equalizing factor in and of itself. He is an orphaned boy of color, whom her father pities. He becomes a servant for the family, all of which helps to establish him as a captive to circumstance, just as she is. Her only way out is marrying the rich and kind Mr. Edgar Linton, against her heart's desire. Heathcliff's way, not just out of his allotted life, but towards a life with Cathy, is to make his way in the world, to win his fortune and her heart. In the new adaptation, a crucial element of the love story is left out. In the book and in the 1935 film, Cathy asks Heathcliff to do just that, go out into the world, make his fortune, and bring it back to her. He makes a false start by way of a failed attempt at doing just that, but returns to Wuthering Heights after a few days out of cowardice. This was Cathy's indication that she could not rely on him to make a home for her, and that choosing Heathcliff would be a choice for ruin and poverty over comfort and stability, not just for her, but for her father. thus using the very little power she has in this world to further sully her family name. The pivotal plot point was omitted from Fennel's adaptation. Cathy's reaction to Heathcliff's failure to prove himself capable of what is within his disposal as a man in the world they live in becomes the point on which the plot pivots, but does not include. Cathy sobbingly admits it would degrade her to marry Heathcliff to her lady's maid, Nelly, who is made the villain in this version when, quite frankly, none is needed. Cathy also says she loves Heathcliff. He is more myself than I am. Whatever souls are made of, his and mine are the same, which, while a beautiful original line from the book, does little to explain the basis of what is wildly considered the greatest love story outside of Romeo and Juliet. The flattening of their love and, quite frankly, the inexplicable blame shifting onto Cathy has begun, turning true love into a trite tale of mutual abuse. I use that term jokingly because mutual abuse is a fallacy created by men and the structures that serve them to avoid real accountability for them. Heathcliff, now man enough to make his way in the world, leaves not at Cathy's behest, but out of injured pride and spite. This is the same in all three works, but only makes sense in the story that includes the previous failed attempt on Heathcliff's part to make his way in the world and therefore build a life for him and Cathy out of will, not spite. Are we to blame her for not wanting to give up her only power in the world to go with a man who denies his? That's not a question we get to ask in Fennel's adaptation. What we do get to see is the emotion on Cathy's face as she deals with the choices she is left to make after Heathcliff leaves. Margot Robbie's beauty turns out to be the most poignant part of the film. It's the visual representation of the real love lost between her and Heathcliff, and the objectified version of perfection she becomes to earn her role as Edgar's wife. Unfortunately, that objectification is beaten to death visually in the film. Instead of relying on the emotional integrity of the story, we are met with garishly drawn, repetitive depictions of a lamb led to slaughter by way of a dead pig that bloodies her skirt, a room made in the same fashion as her skin, like she is a literal wall-mounted beast. And of course, the doll Isabella makes in Cathy's likeness, because she too wants to objectify and then eventually be objectified, like Cathy, which again, for all the points that are glossed over and missed, is a dizzying one to focus on, especially when the blame for the dissolution of Cathy and Heathcliff's chance at a life together seems entirely on Cathy's head in this version of the story. The sickness that society infects Cathy and Heathcliff's real love with is what creates the kink in their relationship. The fact that my previous prediction of a dungeon sex vibe in this version of the film seems to be entirely consensual on the part of Edgar's sister is also a cop-out that dilutes, misunderstands, and then muddies the point. The point of Heathcliff's marriage to Isabella, Edgar's sister, is not just to create jealousy in the heart of Cathy, but also to objectify and defame the name that Cathy has taken over his. Making Isabella crawl figuratively and literally puts the family that took his Cathy from him in their place, and is meant to highlight Cathy's role as a pretty piece of furniture in the Linton home rather than the earthly being she was with Heathcliff. This twist of the knife and ill fate for the Linton women is the result of Heathcliff's failures, not theirs. It's also worth noting that I'm referring to Isabella as Edgar's sister, because that's exactly what she is in the book and the 39 adaptation. But she is Edgar's ward or adoptive daughter in the 2026 version. This is inexplicable to me, except perhaps as an attempt to work in the patriarchal narrative that dictates Cathy's decisions and Heathcliff's failures, without bothering to contextualize it or highlight the ways in which that very truth is what is ruinous to Cathy and Heathcliff's love to begin with. On this same note, Cathy's father is made into a tyrant in Fennel's version. His ill temper is meant to replace another sibling character missing from this version, Kathy's brother, Hindley, who was originally Heathcliff's torturer. I don't think paring down the male familial element in Kathy's lineage does much to injure the story, but I don't think it makes plain the true lack of choice Kathy has in her station in life, especially in the face of these two literal father figures, although I am assuming that is the intent. The wardrobe misses a huge opportunity to carry emotional weight, as that weight is dissipated with every plot failure. Without any work to establish the equality between the two lovers, we are just left with a willful woman and a twisted boy. It's a huge letdown and a shame because Margot Robbie is up to inhabiting Kathy with all the humor and guile that Oberon was. To me, it is clear she studied Kathy in the 39 film, and I am surprised more hasn't been made of the fact that this is an adaptation of that film and not the book. Don't get me wrong, the costume designer is a genius. The clothes are perfect, but the caliber of the resonance to the heart of Wuthering Heights is mismatched with this version. I think the styling in the film is much more impressive than the press rollout wardrobe has been, at least on Margot. While her looks have been flawless, that is much the point. Flawless is not at all what Wuthering Heights is. It's about the mess of humanity. The heart of love is flawed. Perfection has no place on Kathy, and her styling on the red carpet works to flatten the success Margot Robbie has in the role. I also have to make note of the decision to keep her wardrobe in the film to 3 colors, black, white, and red. I respect the weight that all those colors and the combinations of them have on the emotional grit of their love story, innocence lost, death, and passion, but that's kind of the definition of the failure of this piece. There is no gray, no shading that builds depth, true romance, or cultural commentary. There is also no fucking Heather in the film, which is a huge missed opportunity considering this version has the advantage of being filmed in color. My heart actually aches for the hillside Heather, the representative soft whisper of actual affection. Without prior knowledge of this story and the 39 film version, I would not have any sense of the bond between these two characters. I know my knowledge of the story may seem like the entire basis for my criticism of it, and that's true, but without it, this would have been unwatchable. I have to assume that the Heather was left out because of the color palette of the film. I can respect the choice to lead with starker emotions of the piece, but you cannot have visceral loss without any actual affection to begin with. And in a visual medium where lacquered red rules the day, I think leaving the regal softness of wild purple Heather out of the story did more damage to it than casting a white man-child in arguably one of the most romantic leading roles in history, a fact that I would have never had a sense of if I had watched this film without reading the book or watching the 1939 film version. The latter does more for the color of love than the bloody red skirt of Kathy in Fennel's version, and it was in black and white. By the time Heathcliff returns with his fortune, Kathy is married, made to be a literal doll by Isabella and Edgar. The flush in her cheeks returns with Heathcliff, and so does her life as a woman, not a plaything. But all this is missed because of the nature of Heathcliff and Kathy's affair. While I don't doubt the lovemaking between literature's two most ravenous for each other's characters, there is an element of objectification that is glaring when played against the flat figurine the Lintons had made her into. The carnal knowledge is lost to power plays that seem to be just as omnipresent as Kathy's skin walls in her bedroom at Thrushcross Grange. The power plays are inherent to the tale. That toxicity is about their situation, not the heart of their love. This film fucks that placement up horribly. By the end, it looks like Kathy enjoys being an object. Without context, it's just a bodice ripper porn. Without any comment on gender and racial dynamics, their love turns into chintz. A timeless love story is transformed into a 136-minute runtime erotica. Fortunately, a lot of the original dialogue remains in this adaptation, including one of my favorite points and what I assume will be further evidence of Kathy's toxicity to the general public. She says Heathcliff belongs to her, that he is hers. This is problematic on its face, given he has been made into a servant to a white family, but given how commodified she is by the Lintons, how literally made into a doll she is, it takes on a much different tone for me. They belong to each other. In a world where neither can really be of value on their own, her because she is a woman and him because he is a man of color, they can belong to each other, and it is not possession of the body, but one of the soul. This haunting of each other's hearts brings me back to another very upsetting lack in Fennel's version. Where the fuck is the haunting? This entire story is based on haunted hearts and cursed land where love is lost. I guess just like the heather, this got cut because of the color scheme. No room for anything that isn't opaque red. Ghosts are decidedly diaphanous and shaded in emotional gray. The most pronounced lack of understanding about the importance of a haunting in Gothic romance is evident in the ending, which was brutally destroyed in a way that stuns me to recount. Kathy is indeed dying, but not of heartbreak, of an ignored miscarriage that has resulted in sepsis. I say ignored because her lady's maid Nelly knew about it and assumed it was hysteria. Because the women-hating is done not by culture or men in this version of the story, but by her female maid. Nelly had an important role in moving the story along in the original, the same way the deliverer of a note who falls asleep in the forest and fails does in a fairy tale. The role she has taken on in Fennel's version is that of a villain who is at fault for the destruction of Kathy and Heathcliff's love. Even if this wasn't another example of passing the responsibility for Heathcliff's first and fundamental failure to attempt to make his way in the world so he and Kathy could build a life together onto a woman, it would be incorrect. The story is about the structures, primarily race, sex, and class, that are ruinous to love and create hate in hearts where once only love was. This strange need to make the lady's maid a villain is entirely lost on me, but as a result of Nelly's dismissing poor Kathy's complaints, she is now on her deathbed, a point that truly only exists to inexplicably injure the structure of the love story between Kathy and Heathcliff. I can appreciate why showing a legit medical issue as the actual cause of Kathy's death, as opposed to a broken heart, would be a needed update to the story. But the feminist ideal of not hiding women's pain is lost when you make the actual cause of that pain a jealous woman who is ignoring it. Fuck. Kathy is near dead when her uterus bleeds out all over her beautiful bedroom, made to look identical to the once lively pallor of her skin. Another point that would be better taken if the circumstances of her death weren't so directly to blame on Nelly and more on the wretchedness of being made an object of adoration and desire, but not love. Heathcliff does not get there in time. I'm trying to pause after that statement, because if I had known that fact going in, I would not have watched this movie at all. We miss him holding her, him asking her to haunt him, the scene when he carries her broken body to the window to look at the heathered-covered moors, at the kingdom they once dreamed of reigning over together. Instead, Heathcliff trots over to Thrushcross Grange on a horse that is barely running to find an already dead Kathy. No ghost, no heather, no diaphanous white nightgown, no long goodbye, no two hearts uniting in the moment before her death, and most importantly, no love story worth telling to be seen anywhere. Just that bright red blood from Catherine's uterus and a dead heart where love should have bloomed, like the omni-absent heather. The odd thing about this film is how exciting it is for me to see teens and young women going gaga over Kathy's looks and the romance they evoke. I am of the mind that a story as classic as Wuthering Heights does indeed live in any attempt to revive it. So while I fucking hated this version, I do love watching the makeup tutorials of young girls attempting to recreate the flush of young love on the moors. I will have to be satisfied with the soul of real love only living in the hearts of young girls, because it seems everyone else has become an actual villain. Thank you for listening and watching Window Dressing. I'm Madeline Jane Auble. I will be back soon with another video episode of Window Dressing. To anyone who hasn't listened to the first episode in my Gothic romance series, I encourage you to go back and listen. And then watch the 1939 Wuthering Heights. Please like and subscribe wherever you are listening or watching, and find me on Instagram at Window Dressing Podcast or Madeline Jane Auble for more content. I'm Madeline Jane Auble.